This presentation was put together in partnership with one of my friends who actually taught management of aggressive behavior in humans. So this is my personal bias. There's a lot of my personal bias in this presentation. Uh, this presentation benefits from significant hands-on training. I'm releasing this as a little bit of like a follow-up to me posting an introduction to aggression lecture. Want to at least state my piece with the management of regressive behavior, just kind of as a follow-up to that one. So if you haven't seen that one, if you haven't seen the rest of these, please watch the rest of the lectures. These are designed to be watched in order and not kind of taken apart too much. So dive into the management of aggressive behavior, keeping you and the dog safe. So number one, I referenced this in the previous lecture. Fights are expensive. They are expensive to me as the person that is initiating that fight or is participating in that fight. They're exhausting. They are high risk, right? I'm risking getting injured. I'm risking my safety by participating in this fight. So a lot of kind of our animalistic reaction to it is rooted in the desire to keep us safe and the desire to minimize how much risk I'm assuming and the desire to minimize how much energy I'm actually expending, or at least conserving energy for the later stages of that fight. So keep in mind that fights are expensive and all animals know this on a certain level, even if it's not like a conscious knowing. Two parts to the management of aggressive behavior: prevention and minimizing injury. And this feels self-explanatory to a certain degree, but I've got to highlight that a large part of the process of managing aggressive behavior is in the prevention of escalation, the prevention of the behavior in the first place. Second stage is just minimizing injury. Once we're in a situation where the dog is exhibiting aggressive behavior, the goal is to minimize the injury to the people around that dog. But really, really want to emphasize the key to this is really prevention in the first place. I don't want to, I need to do everything that I can to try to prevent the behavior in the first place, so prevent us from escalating that far. Okay, so let's talk about that first part of prevention. Situational awareness. If I'm in an animal shelter specifically, I want to check my environment for risks. There are all kinds of risks present when we are in a shelter or a kennel scenario or a situation. The hose that always kind of sticks out in random places that can pose a tripping hazard. There's all sorts of kind of sharp edges to potentially corners of kennels, kennel doors, handles. Make sure that you're staying cognizant of that. If I'm going into a situation knowing that I might be working with a dog who might exhibit some level of aggressive behavior due to either fear, stress, arousal, I want to know what's going on in my environment. So do a mindful check of what's going on around you. Look at where those risks are. If I'm going to get pulled any direction, what direction do I want to get pulled? If I need to kind of leverage the dog away from me, what can I wrap my leash around and pull away from my body? Right? Look at that environment and look at what's going on in that environment. Know how you're getting out before you even start interacting with the dog. Know how you're going to get out of this situation. And if you don't know how you're going to get out safely, you need to not start in the first place. Know where your exits are. Ask for backup. This is so overlooked. And there's some places, I've worked some places that have a really, really strong culture built around asking for backup and having there be no shame in asking for backup and having people readily ask for assistance when they're working with dogs. Even if it's just like, hey, will you just back me up for a quick minute while I take this dog out? We've had some arousal issues right at the fence or right at the kennel door. I just want to have backup just in case. Ask for backup if you're in a management position in a shelter or a dog kennel or any multi-animal facility. Make sure that you mindfully create that culture of it being okay to ask for backup. Be surprised at how few places have that culture there. And go in with the plan. Again, this all seems kind of self-explanatory, and I want to emphasize that if this feels intuitive to you, good. But but also make sure that you are making a conscious effort. You're making an effort to not just subconsciously be like, I know that I do all these things. Mindfully do them. Because a lot of the times when I'm working with handlers, especially in shelter settings, when I'm working with handlers that are getting into these situations, they're asking me how to deal with aggressive behavior. Most of the time, they're not going into the situation with a plan, or they're viewing it as like, I just need to get the dog out. My goal is to get the dog out, and my goal is to give the dog some treats to counter condition a little bit. Even if they understand those fear pieces, they're missing so much of this. Go in with a plan. Know what resources you have available to you. Know what's going on in the environment, right? What sort of tools do I have available to me? Do I have a backup leash on me just in case the dog chews through this one? Do I want to have a backup drag leash just that I've got kind of an extra point of contact here? Do I have a toy to give the dog if we've got arousal? You know, the dog is going to escalate with jumping and grabbing the leash or playing tug with my clothes or something like that. Do I have a toy? Do I have a couple of toys? Do I have options for toys for the dog to offer them something else? Go into it with a plan. Is your treat bag full of a wide variety of treats? You should not underestimate the value of being able to grab a fistful of treats and throwing it at the ground, right? Get you out of that a little bit. So go in with a plan. Don't be afraid to ask for backup. Know your exits and check your environment for risks. So going back to that environment for risks, sharp objects, unstable objects, other animals, and tools available. Other animals being really, really critical. I've got other animals behind fences. I can have some fence fighting there, even if I have a very social dog. Especially in a shelter setting, we can have dogs that are very, very, very social. But when I put them in a shelter environment, when I put a fence in between them, I can get some aggressive behaviors. I can get them barking, lunging, growling, snapping at even grabbing onto the fence when I wouldn't see that in other contexts. And we can have redirected bites that come from that. We can have dogs that are so focused on, they're like trying to get at the fence. And then if I go and put my body in between that dog and the fence, I'm risking myself getting bit. If I pull the dog away from the fence, I can have a redirected bite. So I want to go into this being mindful that I need to watch out for the environment. I need to be mindfully looking at like, okay, there's that spot up there. There's that spot up there. I'm going to go as I approach this kennel that has this dog that's barking. I'm going to walk just a little bit faster, or I'm going to give the dog some treats as we're passing by, or I'm going to throw some treats past this kennel, or I'm going to toss a toy down beyond the kennel. We're moving quickly past that. So we've got our tools available to us. We've got those toys, those resources, those tools available to us in those moments. Now, tools being available to us, we've got our leash, right? We've got whatever equipment the dog is wearing, whether it's a harness, a collar, whatever it is. We want to know the limitations of some of those tools. If I have a dog that's just wearing a flat collar with a plastic buckle, that might not be very secure, right? Depending on the manufacturer of that collar, I've had plenty of plastic buckle collars break. That's not necessarily a reliable point of contact for you and the dog. Likewise, a harness might not give me the same leverage that I need, especially if it's an ill-fitting harness, or if it's a harness that's not really designed to give me a lot of physical control over the dog if I needed it. I want to be mindful of what sort of equipment the dog is wearing that gives me appropriate control, and also that's not contributing to these behaviors that I'm trying to avoid, right? The whole goal is prevention. So if I put some sort of aversive tool in the dog, if I put something the dog does not like on the dog, or I make something the dog does not like part of the sequence, I have to recognize that I am increasing my risk, and I'm increasing the risk of those around me as well. So look at what tools we have available. Like I said, your leash, the equipment the dog is wearing. You could look at pig boards. Not enough shelters have pig boards just kind of laying around. Great tool to have. Just you can make them yourself with just a big piece of plywood and a couple of handles screwed to them. That's what the first shelter I worked at. That's what we had. Or you can buy the actual pig boards for moving livestock and stuff. Just a solid board that I can put in between that dog and something else. Whether that's a kennel or whether that's another dog or a person, if we get into some sort of altercation thing, I've got some sort of physical barrier that I can put in place there. Or even visual barriers. It doesn't have to be something that I'm using as like a physical barrier to stop something. It could just be a visual barrier. right? I'm passing by a row of kennels. I know this dog struggles walking by kennels. Let's put up some sheets. Let's put up something that blocks that visual just for that moment. Right? So look at what resources you have. Look at what things are around you. Those are your tools that you have available to you. Knowing your exits. How do I get out if I'm in an incident with this dog? And I also want you to look at how can the dog get out of this? Because if we're looking at, I'm putting the dog in a potentially stressful situation, and I'm putting the dog potentially into a state of fight or flight. If I remove the option of flight, all the dog has left is to fight. So my goal in preventing me getting into a serious altercation with the dog is allowing the dog the opportunity to get out. Now, I don't mean letting the dog escape. I don't mean dropping the leash and letting the dog go. But I am saying that we need to at least give the dog 6 feet of space. Or if I'm working with a dog that might need more than that from me, I might set up my environment, set up my space in a way where I can safely drop the leash and safely remove myself or safely separate myself and the dog physically. And if I don't have that space, it might not be appropriate to work with that right now. In the shelter, we have to make do with what we've got, but there's always some modifications that I can make. Right? If we've got guillotine kennels, which are kennels that are divided in half by a door that goes up and down, can I put some of the dogs on the opposite side while I take this dog out? Can I put them on the opposite side and have a couple of kennels open that this dog could retreat into once we get out of this kennel? Know how the dog's going to get out of the situation and know how you are going to get out of the situation. Do I have an open kennel that I can get into if I need to? Do I have my cell phone on me? Do I have a radio on me that I can reliably get a hold of somebody else if I needed to? Is there somebody within yelling distance? Right? How am I going to get out of the situation and how's the dog going to get out? And if I can't answer those two questions, I might need to reconsider going in the first place. Know your exits. Get your backup. I just started referencing this. So who's your backup and where are they? How long will it take them to respond to you? We overlook this a lot and we say, well, there's a lot of people kind of floating around, but where's the closest one and how long will they take to get to you? Because incidents, these aggressive behaviors, barking, lunging, growling, biting, especially when we escalate to a full bite, they're happening very, very fast. And I need backup available right now. Not 5-10 minutes. 5-10 minutes, this is done, it's over. Right? Over in that the whole incident is done. We've resolved it by then. Where are they? How do I call them? Is it with my phone? How long does it take you to dial somebody on your phone? How long does it take you to figure out who's here? Think about who's here while you are dealing with a dog that's potentially lunging, growling, snapping at you. You have to think, okay, who's here today? Who can I call? Where's their number? Let me find them in my phone, and now let me call them, and now they explain to them what's happening. How do you call them? That's why radios are super valuable in a multi-animal facility. Radios just to say, hey, I'm over here. I need some backup. Also consider, what do they do? If you're in a multi-animal facility, you should be preparing. If you're in a multi-animal facility that occasionally houses dogs that might be exhibiting these behaviors, which is most dogs, all dogs have teeth. What are they going to do when they get to you? Do they have tools available to them? Or are we going to be two people wrestling a dog on the floor and both getting hurt? And then eventually the dog's going to either the dog's going to get hurt in that moment or the dog's going to be euthanized because it is doing serious damage to multiple people because they're wrestling around on the floor with him. So what tools did they have available to them? Can they grab a catch pole from out in the hallway? Is there a catch pole on the way? Is there multiple catch poles? Is there backup leashes available, or do they have to go to the opposite end of the building for it? Right? Where are these tools in relation to this person that's going to help you out? When you're going into the situation, you want to know the answers to these questions and feel confident going into this that you can get that backup if you really did need it. So here's that situational awareness again. Check the environment for risks, know your exit, ask for backup, and do not go into the situation without a plan. That's your prevention piece. If you're doing all of that, the odds of this escalating to a serious incident where you're getting seriously hurt have just gone down significantly. All right, but I'm sure the reason why you're watching this and the bigger question you have is how do I minimize injury or how do I avoid getting hurt when I'm dealing with a dog who's trying to bite me? First of all, as I've stated in a previous lecture, no dog has ever tried to bite me and not succeeded. Right? I haven't been bit very much because I go in, I take a lot of preventative steps to avoid getting bit in the first place. But any dog that has truly wanted to bite me has bit me. So how do we minimize injury? I don't have any major scar, knock on wood. I don't have any major scars from any serious incidents to the dogs. And a couple of those could have escalated if I would have responded a little bit differently. So how do we minimize injury? What I want is like a puncture. This is my little hierarchy here on where, kind of like the humane hierarchy that we talked about in a previous lecture, kind of where we're going to start and how we want to escalate or de-escalate things. So our first level down there is our stance. So what I tell people when we're working hands-on is check your feet. If your feet are very close together, so if you want to try this yourself, stand with your feet very close together, right next to each other, and see how stable you are. You're not very stable. If both of your feet are right next to each other, you've got one point of contact with the ground and you are very wobbly. Spread your feet shoulder width apart and stagger them a little bit. Same thing goes for if my feet are in line with each other directly across, I can rock back and forth like this. But if I kind of separate them a little bit, so this is the ball of my foot and this is the heel of my foot, ball of my foot, heel of my foot. If I'm standing kind of like this, right, I'm a lot more stable than like this. So we want to just stagger our feet a little bit, be mindful of what those points of contact are with the ground and start creating a more stable stance for myself. Let's check your feet. We're going to avoid an oppositional reflex. Oppositional reflex is if I grab your arm and I pull you, your immediate reaction is to pull back against that a little bit. So I like people to keep their elbows in and relax their shoulders. Elbows in and relax your shoulders. Don't be way out here. This is gassing a lot of muscles that I don't use very often, trying to hold a dog out like this. This is using a lot of muscles that I don't use very often, and I'm going to gas out very, very quickly. So we want to keep our elbows in, use the stronger muscles, engage all these outside muscles that are a little bit stronger here. Relax your shoulders a little bit so I'm not way up like this and kind of like holding the dog really, really tight like this. Relax. Get your elbows in. Use kind of your core strength versus relying on, you know, physically holding the dog away from me. So we're checking our stance. Where are our feet? Are our feet together? Out a little bit? Are our elbows in? We're keeping ourselves stable, right? Stance is all about if we are going to escalate this conflict, I'm not in a position where you're going to access my face, my neck, or my center mass. If I'm going to get bit, I prefer to get bit right here. Or I prefer to get bit on my hands. I've been bit a couple times on my hands, and I don't have any major scars on my hands. Prefer to get bit here, outside. I prefer to get bit on the outside of my hand, and I prefer to get bit like knee down, reasonably safe. Right? I don't want to get bit thighs. We've got some arteries there that I don't want to hit towards the inside of my thigh. And I definitely don't want to get bit kind of center mass here. I obviously don't want to get bit around here. Obviously, I don't want to get bit here on the bottom of my arms. I'm going to get bit. I'd like to get bit right here. So elbows in, relax shoulders, be in a stance where if there was some sort of incident, you're stable enough to not go down and start injuring major areas. So there's our stance. Let's go into pull. So I want the dog to pull. I don't want to be pulling. I want the dog to be pulling. I want to allow the dog to take that flight. I want to give the option of flight. And I want to suggest with my body language, this is why this benefits a lot from like a hands-on activity, which I'm more than happy to do. Please call me out to your local shelter or just your local group of dog trainers. Let's talk about this in person. Let's work through some of these things in person. So when the dog starts pulling, I don't want to go down on the ground when the dog decides to pull. And I don't want to pull that dog closer to me because then we're escalating that conflict. I want to allow the dog to pull and stay stable. So I check my stance, make sure that my stance is nice and stable. Elbows are in. I'm going to put my hand to my hip. Putting my hand to my hip is starting to allow me to throw kind of some of my weight into it and throw some of my like center mass into it if I need to, so I stay standing up. And I'm going to point to the goal. Where do I want to go with this dog? Do I want to go back that way? Great. Point that direction. If I've got a dog like this, the dog's pulling away that direction, and I'm staring at them like this, the odds are that dog's going to keep going that direction. I bring my arms in, I point over to the goal. I'm now a little bit less threatening as well, right? I'm a little bit smaller facing this way. I'm suggesting we go that direction once the dog kind of stops pulling away from it. This is where I want, right? This is the early stages. This is the early intention movements, right? These behaviors conducive to conflict resolution. These are the early stages of aggression. And I want to set the dog up to be able to de-escalate these moments. Hey. There's plenty of times where I've had a dog start pulling against me. They're maybe growling, they start pulling against me. I get stable, I back up a little bit, I decide where I'm going, allow the dog to just pull, allowing the dog to just kind of pull out that way. I take a deep breath. Once the dog stops, settles down a little bit, maybe I throw some treats, maybe I do something, right? And just stop and talk. What's going on? We'll talk about that in a second. Stop and talk to the dog for a minute. Maybe toss down some treats. Even if they don't eat the treats, they're sniffing them, right? A little bit calmer. I'm already pointing the direction I want to go. Let's go this way. Let's go that way. So I want to be in this pull conversation. Whenever I'm dealing with a dog that might want to bite me, might consider biting me, we're in this potentially aggressive behavior category of behavior. I want to allow the dog to pull away from me whenever possible. All right, there's our first two stages. Now we're into the more what we think of like traditionally as aggressive behaviors, the strike and the grab. So strike, we are into threat displays. If the dog comes up and muzzle punches me, right, I'm in my stance. I'm suggesting that we go this way. I'm like, hey, we got to go back over this way. Let's go. The dog, instead of retreating, comes up and strikes, right? A little bite. This is not a full grab and hold. This is just a quick bite. Stop and talk to shut it down. We're not moving forward. We're not doing any more training. We're not learning anything. We are going back to whatever was safe previously, and we're going to shut this whole thing down. But when I'm in that moment, right, the dog just came up a bit, or the dog is kind of throwing out lunges towards me, kind of biting at me, trying to bite me, not actually trying to bite me, just trying to kind of strike out, threaten to strike. Stop and talk to the dog. Literally want you to talk to the dog. Stop and talk. Hey, whoa. What's going on? Right? That moment, it's not necessarily going to accomplish anything for the dog, but it allows you a second to think about why this is happening. Why is this dog doing this? Are they cornered? Is there a threat? Have you communicated that you're a threat to this dog? Why are they lunging at you? Why are they telling you that you are a threat? They're threatening you because they're viewing you as a threat to their safety in that moment. Stop and talk. Whoa. Easy. What's going on? You're in the corner. I'll back up a little bit. I'll give you a little bit of space, right? And you can't see my arm, but I'm like keeping my arm in a little bit, right? I'll give you a little bit of space here, but I'm going to keep my elbow in. I'm going to kind of bring that hand to the hip as the dog kind of starts walking in some direction. Stop. Talk. Figure out what's going on here and shut it down. We're done. Once we have started lunging, growling, whatever, we're done. Take a break. We need some deep breaths, and then we'll come back into it in a little bit. But right now, all that we're learning is that I might be a threat. So remember, fights are expensive. We don't want to escalate to a full grab bite. Fights are very expensive. Even just those threats, even just those like lunges and snapping at me, those are expensive. Those are taxing on the dog's body. So A, I need to keep myself from exerting too much energy just in case I need to be in a more serious conversation with the dog. So I want to conserve my energy as best as possible. The dog, even if they're not consciously thinking the same thing, uh, their like early brain is kicking in here, trying to kind of conserve energy or start filling them with enough hormones that they can kind of power through this. That little extra adrenaline, that little extra cortisol, it's going to keep me going through this. So remember, fights are expensive. We don't want to escalate all the way to the top stage of this, which is that grab bite. That grab bite, once the dog has grabbed and is holding, we want to stabilize, wait for release, and as soon as there's a release, we meet that release with opposing force. So for example, last time that I got bit was a couple of years ago now, probably like 4 or 5 years ago. Dog bit me like 20 times in the hand, very, very small bites, really small, just multiple little punctures all over my hand. But what I did, once this bite started, bit, held onto my hand, I gave the dog my hand. I'm not going to pull and start playing tug with my hand. Relax, holding it there. The dog is kind of readjusting their grip a couple times. I'm waiting for release. And then as soon as the dog let go, then I pulled away and then I move away. So we want to stabilize the situation. That could be getting the dog, getting the leash around something so that you can meet that with opposing force. It could be the dog comes up and bites right here. It could be pulling this in, or at least pulling it against something more stable, or putting myself against something stable so I don't go down on the ground. I'm pretty ineffective once I'm down on the ground. I'm a lot more stable if I'm kind of up and in a low stance here. So I want to stabilize what's going on here, get some sort of security going on here, moving towards a fence, moving towards something stable. I'm trying to hold on to something high and stable, and I'm waiting for release, not playing tug with my limb. Right? I want a quick little puncture. I want the worst thing to be a couple punctures. What I don't want is for me to pull, and then we have lacerations. We want to stabilize and secure it, wait for release, and deliver that opposing force once the dog lets up. You can know the theory of this. You can know it really, really well. You can say it yourself all the time. In those moments, your animal brain starts kicking in as well. Your animal brain starts telling you, just pull away. Don't relax. Pull away. Right? You start panicking. Your hormones start going absolutely wild. So we're going to be very forgiving of ourselves, and we're going to avoid getting up to these situations where the dog is actually biting by going through a lot of prevention, watching our stance, making sure that we are stable just in case it starts escalating beyond a little bit of like, hey, I'm uncomfortable with you. And if we do get up to this level, if we do get up to the level where the dog is biting or is grabbing or holding, we want to minimize how much damage is being done to us by not ripping our hand away. So remember that first stage, I cannot say this enough. The first stage of this is prevention. I do not want to be in a situation where I'm provoking aggressive behavior. I don't want to be cornering a dog. I don't want to tell a dog through my actions, through my body language, that they need to view me as a threat or that I am a threat. I mean, I don't want to actually pose a threat to that dog because then they are totally justified in telling me off, right? In engaging in conflict with me. If I'm going to engage in conflict with the dog, I need to be comfortable with the dog engaging in conflict with me. So I'm going to prevent it, set myself up for success. And if I do get into that situation where the dog is aggressing, the dog is giving me those conflict behaviors, I want to minimize injury to myself and minimize injury to the other animals around. This is a really complex topic that benefits from a lot of kinesthetic learning. Now, I'm not saying you need to go out and go work with dogs that are threatening to bite you. Quite the opposite. Practice these things with dogs that you are not worried about that. Practice, run through these things in your head so that when you're in those situations, you've practiced it 100 times before, and now we're just doing the same thing we've always done. We want to look for our exits. We want to check our environment, have that situational awareness. watch our stance, watch your stance at all times, and make sure that you're practicing these things outside of those situations where you really need it. If you want to talk about this more, which I love talking about this kind of stuff more, please sign up on Coffee for a supporter, to be a supporter, get access to our Discord. We've got a couple of channels for different tiers there. We've got an exclusive channel where we do assignments every month, and you actually get feedback on those assignments. And then you and I meet not face to face, but like virtually face to face once a month. And I would love to come to your shelter, or your town, or your dog training club, whatever it is. And I'd love to talk about this stuff in person. We've got options like that available. We are a for-profit. Animal Welfare United is a for-profit business. I just need to make enough money to pay my bills. Anything you fundraise beyond that, I'll help you fundraise for it, and it can go straight to your nonprofit. I'm not trying to make additional, I'm not trying to displace any donor dollars or anything. So call me out to your shelter and let's work together.